Before the sun, before the wind, before anything else the mountain offered, there was the cold, and a girl climbing a frozen cliff alone in the dark. For 4 winters she had done this, scraping a silver moss from the frozen stone, a moss that erased her scent so completely that no one in the north could find her, claim her, or ever call her his. She had made herself into nothing, on purpose, because she had once watched what they did to a girl who let herself be seen. She believed she was invisible. She believed she was safe. And then the back of her neck went cold for a reason that had nothing to do with the wind. She looked up. He was standing on the ridge above her, perfectly still, watching. And in that single, terrible breath, she understood. He had always known she was there. The cold came first. It always did. Before the light, before the wind, before anything else the mountain offered, there was the cold. And Wren had learned to love it the way some people learn to love a difficult parent. Not because it was kind, because it kept her alive. She pressed her gloved fingers into a seam in the frozen rock and pulled herself up another foot. Below her, the valley slept. Above her, the sky had not yet decided what color it wanted to be. That thin hour, that hollow hour, the one she had claimed for herself back when she was still too young to know what she was running from. She was 18 now. She had been climbing this cliff since she was 14. 4 winters. 4 years of pulling herself up the same dark stone before the world woke. The moss grew where the wind could not reach it. A long silver shelf of it, tucked under the lip of the rock. Ghost moss, the old healer Bryony had called it once, in a voice like dry leaves. It grew only on ground an alpha had claimed, on land old enough to hold a scent of its own. And it did one thing. One strange, merciful thing. It erased. A girl who wore it did not smell like fear, did not smell like heat, did not smell like an omega ripe for the choosing. A girl who wore it did not smell like anything at all. Wren had made herself into nothing. On purpose, she worked her small knife along the edge of the growth. Careful, quiet. Her breath clouded in front of her face and vanished. The scent of the moss filled her nose, faint and metallic, like snow laid over iron. She had come to find it comforting. Most people would never understand that. Most people had never needed to disappear. She filled the linen sack. She did not hurry. And then the back of her neck went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the wind. She looked up. He was standing on the ridge above her, not moving, not speaking, simply there, dark against the pale sky, as still as the stone itself, the way only truly powerful things know how to be still. The wind moved his cloak, and did not seem to move him at all. Thorn, the alpha who ruled Ironwood. Wren's heart slammed once against her ribs, then went very quiet. The way a hunted thing goes quiet. She knew that kind of stillness. She had spent 4 years practicing a smaller version of it. She had seen him before, from a distance, a shape on the upper path at midwinter, never close, never turning toward her. And every time she had told herself the same thing. The moss was working. He could not scent her. She was safe inside her own nothing. But he was looking at her now. Not searching, not surprised, looking. And in that one held breath, in the narrow space between his eyes and hers, an understanding arrived and settled in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. He had always known she was there. From the ridge, Thorn watched the girl go still. He had watched her go still many times. He knew the shape of it now, the way she folded herself smaller, the way she gave the wind less to find. He had come to know her without ever speaking a single word to her, the way a man comes to know a deer that crosses his land at the same gray hour, season after season. She believed the moss hid her. It did, mostly. From the others, it hid her completely. They passed her in a crowded room and felt nothing, the way you feel nothing for a tapestry on a wall. But there was something underneath the nothing, a thread, a trace too faint to name and too stubborn to ignore. His wolf had found it the second season she came climbing his cliffs in the dark, and his wolf had never once let it go. He had let her keep coming, year after year. He had told himself it was because she harmed no one. He had told himself the border was his to enforce or leave alone, as he pleased. Both things were true. Neither was the whole truth, and he knew it, standing there in the bitter dark. The whole truth was simpler, and far more dangerous. He had wanted to know if she would ever choose to come to him on her own. So he turned away. He always turned away. Wren did not run. Running, she had learned a long time ago, was the fastest way to be chased. She held his gaze across the open air, the knife still in one hand, the sack of stolen moss in the other, ice crystals melting against her wrists, where the old protection had nearly worn away to nothing. She was caught. She knew she was caught. And the strange part, the part she would turn over in her mind for nights afterward, was that her body did not feel the way fear was supposed to feel. It felt like standing too close to a fire. Then he was gone. Not suddenly. He simply turned, the way weather turns, and walked back along the upper path. And the gray closed quietly over the place where he had been. Wren stayed pressed to the rock for a long time. She did not let herself wonder what his silence meant. She did not let herself wonder what it would cost her. The fear had a beginning. They always do. She had been 12. She had not been allowed in the great hall that night. Children never were. Not for the mating moon. But she had always been the kind of small creature that creeps too close to the things that could swallow it whole. So she had pressed herself behind a carved pillar and watched through a gap in the wood. The hall had smelled of pine resin and burning herbs. Even now, that scent could turn her stomach to cold water. On the raised floor, a girl knelt with iron locked around her wrists. Sable, 17 years old, soft-voiced, the kind of girl the elders called blessed because the alphas noticed her. Her heat had risen early that winter, and the elders had called that a gift. They had braided flowers through her hair, as though she were going to a festival. But Sable's eyes had been wrong. Too wide, too bright, bright with fever, not with joy. The scent of her had flooded the hall, sweet and desperate and unbearably exposed. And the gathered alphas had stood in a loose ring with a look on their faces that the child Wren had been far too young to name. She could name it now. Hunger without conscience. The elder spoke of honor, of destiny, of the blessing of the moon. Sable wept, and when the chosen alpha stepped onto the floor, Sable said one word: no. The elder kept speaking. The alpha kept walking. The hall kept watching. And when it was over, when the sound of it had shaken the candle flames and gone ringing off the cold stone, the crowd turned to one another. and called it beautiful. The moon has blessed her, they said. She is fortunate to be chosen. Wren had gone home that night and pressed her face into her furs and understood two things with a clarity that has never once left her. The first, that she was an omega. She had known it the way you know a storm is coming from the color of the sky, not yet arrived, but certain. The second, that she would never kneel on that floor, not ever, whatever it took. By the time she reached the tree line, the sky over Ironwood had finally chosen its color, a pale gray, the gray of the hour before snow. Wren walked through the old pines with the sack held tight against her chest, her steps quiet on the packed ice, her mind very far from quiet. 4 years she had been invisible. 4 years she had been nothing, on purpose, and it had kept her whole. And now, a man who could undo her with a single word had looked at her across the open air and chosen, once again, to say nothing. Somewhere at the base of her mind, the part of her she had spent years keeping silent lifted its head, slow, warm, far too knowing. Not now, Wren told it. It did not lie back down. The Great Hall of Ironwood had been built to make a person feel small. Wren understood that the moment she crossed the threshold, the stone columns rose so high the candlelight could not reach the top of them. The ceiling vanished into shadow. Iron chandeliers burned with enough flame to light a village, and still the dark pressed in at the edges, patient, watching. Tapestries hung the length of the walls in deep blue and black. Old battles, old blood. The whole room had been made to remind you exactly how little you were. She walked in with the other presenting omegas. 24 young women in pale wool and silver thread, their hair unbound the way tradition demanded. The floor was smooth gray stone, and it carried sound like water. Every footstep, every whisper, every nervous rustle of a skirt came back to her doubled. She had dreaded this night since she was 12 years old. She had also prepared for it for just as long. That morning, in the gray light before the household woke, she had worked the ghost moss compound into the soft skin of her wrists, her throat, the bend of her inner arms. The faint, cold scent of it had risen around her, like snow over iron, and she had breathed it in and let it steady her. As long as it held, she was nothing. As long as it held, no alpha in this hall could find the thing that would make her his. She found a place near the outer wall, not hiding, simply taking up less space. In through the nose, 4 counts, out through the mouth, 4 counts. She had learned to move through a crowd the way she moved across a cliff face in the dark. Small, quiet, drawing nothing toward her. The trick was to want nothing visibly. The trick was to be a closed door in a hall full of open ones. Then the elder took the floor, a tall man, hollow-cheeked. A voice like cold water poured slowly. Crane, the others called him. He began the old words, the ones Wren had memorized years ago, the ones she had always thought were beautiful the way a knife is beautiful, elegant, purposeful, made for one thing only. The moon recognizes her daughters. The bond recognizes its match. What is written in blood and breath shall be made whole. And then the alphas began to move. This was the part she had braced for. The slow circling, the deliberate breathing, the assessment that dressed itself up in ceremony but was, underneath, something far older than ceremony. They moved among the presenting omegas the way buyers move through a market they already own. Unhurried, entitled, certain. Wren kept her chin level and her eyes soft, focused on nothing. 2 alphas passed near her. Neither slowed. 3 more, in a loose cluster. One glanced her way with the mild, polite interest a man might give a piece of furniture, and then moved on. It is holding, she thought. It is holding. It is fine. Keep breathing. And then a different kind of presence stopped in front of her, and the air around it had weight. Lord Vance. He was not young, but he was powerful, and he knew it, and he wore the knowing like an expensive coat. There was a pressure that came off well-trained alphas like him, a deliberate heaviness they could push into a room when they chose. He pushed it at her now, gently, the way a man tests a door to see if it is locked. He studied her face for a moment that stretched far too long. "You are from the Southern Pack," he said. Not a question. "Yes, my lord. Your elder speaks highly of you." His eyes moved over her with the slow calm of a man counting livestock. "You seem composed." "I try to be, my lord." He made a low sound that might have been approval, and then he leaned in, not close enough to break the rules, close enough to mean it, and he breathed her in. Wren felt the moment stretch thin. She felt the cold compound on her skin and prayed it held. She kept her face perfectly smooth, perfectly empty, even as something in her chest began to beat hard and high. "You wear an interesting absence, girl," Vance murmured. Her pulse stumbled. "My wolf finds you." He paused, and the pause was worse than any word. Intriguing. The way a locked box is intriguing. He could almost sense it. The moss was not hiding her, not from him. It was turning her into a question, and a man like Vance did not walk away from questions. He collected them. He opened them. "I am afraid I do not understand, my lord," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had practiced that too. "No?" His eyes held hers a moment more. Then he smiled. Slow. Sure of itself. "You will." And he moved on. Wren let out one careful breath. She did not notice that across the hall, a pair of dark eyes had followed the entire exchange. Thorn had been watching her from the moment she entered. He had not meant to. There were a dozen alphas in his hall, and twice that many matters of state pressing on him, and a king did not stand at the wall and watch one girl in pale wool fold herself smaller and smaller until she nearly disappeared. And yet, he had found her the instant she crossed the threshold, the way the eye finds the one still thing in a moving room. She wore the absence well, better than anyone he had ever seen wear it. To the rest of them, she was simply not there. A blank place in the air, a name on a list, and nothing more. But his wolf had lifted its head the moment she walked in. There it was again. That thread. That trace beneath the nothing. Too faint to name, impossible to ignore. It was not a scent so much as the memory of one, the shape of where a scent should be. And his wolf strained toward it with a low, steady insistence that he had been managing, badly, for 4 years. Then Vance stopped in front of her, and Thorn went very still. He knew Vance, knew the weight the man pushed into rooms, knew the particular hunger of an alpha who had been refused too rarely to understand the word. He watched Vance lean in. He watched him breathe her in. He watched the girl hold her face smooth while something frightened moved behind her eyes, and he felt his own jaw tighten until it ached. His wolf did not like it. His wolf did not like it at all. She is not yours, he reminded himself. She has chosen no one, least of all you. But he was already crossing the hall. Wren felt the cold before she understood what it was. A drop in temperature against her back, where the stone should have been the coldest thing in reach. She turned her head. He was there, not in front of her, beside her, his shoulders set against the next pillar, his arms loose at his sides, his eyes on the room and not on her. He had come to stand in the one narrow gap along the wall where the crowd thinned and the noise softened, the exact place she had chosen for herself an hour before. He showed no sign that he had been looking at her, and yet he had somehow come to stand exactly here. Wren became very still. This close, she could see the sharp line of his jaw, a faint scar along the left edge of it, old, long since healed. His hands, she noticed, without meaning to notice, were perfectly at rest. Not the stillness of effort, the stillness of a man who had never once needed to prove anything by moving. She should look away. She did not look away. "You are not enjoying this," he said. His voice, this close, was lower than it had been across the hall. She felt it more than heard it, a low resonance that moved through the stone at her back and into her spine. "I am honored to attend, Your Majesty." A pause. "That was not what I said." She turned her face forward, toward the central fire. "The ceremony is long," he finished. "Cold. Built, I have always suspected, more for the comfort of the watching than for the comfort of anyone made to stand in it." He was not looking at her. He might have been speaking to the room. "You have been standing in this same gap for 40 minutes, he said. She blinked. "You noticed." "I notice most things." She turned several answers over in her mind. She let all of them go. Beside her, he shifted his weight, not toward her, not away. A small recalibration, nothing more. And yet she became suddenly, intensely aware of the heat coming off him. Alpha warmth always ran higher than the rest. She knew that. She had felt it in passing all her life. But his was something else. It was like standing beside a forge in a cold room. She had spent 4 years on frozen cliffs before dawn. She had made herself immune to cold. She had built her whole life around not feeling things. And she was, she noted with a quiet flare of alarm, not cold, not anywhere he was close. "Vance spoke with you," Thorne said. "Yes." What did he want? She glanced at him sideways before she could stop herself. His profile gave her nothing. Still water over deep stone. "I am not sure, Your Majesty." "He is looking for a bond." Thorne's voice stayed level. "He has been looking for 3 seasons now." A beat. "He is not a gentleman." The words were simple, but there was something underneath them she could not quite name. Not a warning, exactly. Not a claim. Something that lived in the narrow country between the two and had not yet decided what it wanted to be. "I will take care of myself," Wren said quietly. And then he looked at her. The first time. Directly. She had expected. She did not know what she had expected. The same flat assessment she had felt from every alpha in the room. The same counting of livestock she had felt from Vance. That was not what she got. His eyes were dark, the color of the sky an hour before snow falls. They rested on her face for one long, unhurried moment, and she had the deeply unsettling sense that he was not looking at her face at all, that he was looking through it, searching for something she had not put there for anyone to find. "Yes," he said at last, "I believe you will." And something happened in her chest that she had no name for. For 4 years, every set of eyes that had landed on her had been measuring, weighing, deciding what she was worth and what she could be used for. His eyes did none of that. His eyes looked at her and simply saw a person standing in a cold hall, tired, afraid, holding herself together by a thread of moss and 40 minutes of practiced breathing. She had forgotten what that felt like. She was not certain she had ever known. She did not understand why her throat had gone tight. She would not let herself understand it. He pushed off the pillar. "Whatever Vance offers you tonight," he said, low, almost gentle, "you are not required to take it, no matter what your elder tells you afterward." She stared at him. That was not a thing alphas said. That was not a thing anyone said. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. The fire popped in the central pit. Somewhere above them, in the gallery, the gathered nobility murmured among themselves, watching the floor, waiting for the night to deliver its drama. "Because no one else in this hall will," he said. And then he walked away. He moved through the crowd the way the most powerful people always do, the room parting around him not because he demanded it, but because the room simply rearranged itself to make space, the way a river rearranges itself around stone. Wren pressed the back of her hand against her sternum. Her heart was knocking hard against her palm. Somewhere at the base of her mind, the part of her she kept silent was very much awake. It had risen onto all 4 feet, ears forward, tail still, watching the place where he had stood with an attention that frightened her more than Vance ever could. "Quiet," she told it. "Not tonight." Her wolf said nothing, but she did not lie back down. From across the hall, Thorn did not let himself look at her again. It cost him something not to. He had said more than he meant to. Far more. A king learned, early and hard, to give nothing away in a crowded room. And he had stood at that wall and given her a piece of himself in the open like a fool. "You are not required to take it." He had no right to say it. The law that would make those words true was still trapped in Crane's council, dying slowly of patience. Tonight, in this hall, under these old rules, an Omega who was claimed, and there was very little even a king could do about it once the bond bite was made. That had to change. It had needed to change for 200 years. And tonight, watching one frightened girl hold her face perfectly smooth, while a man like Vance breathed her in like she was a thing he had already decided to own. Tonight, for the first time, the patience he had carried so carefully for so long had begun, very quietly, to burn. He did not yet know her name, but he had decided one thing, standing in the shadow of his own great hall, while the candle flames bent and the bond words echoed off the cold stone. Whatever Vance wanted with her, he was not going to get it. 3 nights after the ceremony, the compound began to fade. Wren felt it the way you feel weather coming, a loosening at the wrists, a faint return of herself to the air around her. By the fourth morning, there was almost nothing left of the protection, and the choice in front of her was the same choice it had always been: climb or be found. So she climbed. The forest between the keep and the cliffs was old pine and black rock, the snow packed to ice beneath the trees, and she moved through it the way she had 1,000 times before. Quick, sure, her breath clouding white and gone, her worn boots finding the old footholds her body had memorized long ago. The cliff rose out of the dark as the sky began to gray. She found her handholds. She began to climb, and this time the moss was higher than it should have been. The last snowfall had buried the lower shelves. She had to climb past her usual mark, 15 feet higher, hunting for an uncut patch along the sheltered side of an outcrop. Her fingers were stiff. The rock was slick with a thin skin of frost. She knew better than to hurry. She hurried anyway. Her boot slipped. It was nothing. A half second. A shift of weight onto a hold that did not hold. She caught herself against the stone, and the edge of it caught her. A clean, hard line along the soft inside of her forearm. The pain came cold first, then hot. She hung there a moment, breathing, her cheek pressed to the freezing rock, and waited for her heart to climb back down out of her throat. Then she finished the harvest one-handed. She did not look at the cut until she was back inside the keep walls. When she finally peeled back her sleeve, she found it bleeding steadily. 2 inches along the tender underside of her arm. Not deep, but not nothing. She tore a strip from her undershirt, wound it tight, and told herself it was fine. It was fine. She was passing the narrow corridor by the fire room when the door opened. "You are bleeding," his voice, behind her. She stopped. She did not have to turn to know who it was. The warmth had already reached her, that low forge heat she had felt against the pillar, rolling down the cold corridor like the opening of an oven door. "It is Minor," she said. "Your wrap is soaked through." He was already moving toward her, not quickly, not with any urgency at all. Just the steady, unhurried approach of a man who had made a decision and would not be talked out of it by anything as small as her protest. "Come inside." "Your Majesty, really? It is Wren." Just her name. She had not told him her name, but of course he knew it. He had told her at the ceremony that he noticed most things, and she was beginning to understand. He had not been boasting. "Come inside," he said again. There was a patience in it that was very near its edge. She went inside. The fire room was small. Stone walls, a low fire, a heavy work table buried under maps and sealed letters. He swept a forearm across one corner of it to clear a space, the way a man clears a space he intends to use. He sat her in the chair nearest the fire. She was already, dangerously, beginning to think of it as her chair. He brought a clean cloth and a small clay pot of salve from a shelf behind the table. Then he pulled the second chair close and sat facing her, close enough that their knees nearly touched, and held out his hand for her arm. She gave it to him with the resigned dignity of someone who has lost a small battle and means to lose it gracefully. He unwound the makeshift wrap without a word, and his hands were careful. That was the first thing she noticed, and she noticed it against her own will. She had expected efficiency. A king bandaging a trespasser, brisk, impatient, eager to get back to his maps. She got care instead. He turned her arm gently toward the firelight to see the cut clearly. His thumb rested against the inside of her wrist as he worked, warm, steady, and the contrast of that heat against her cold skin traveled all the way up to her shoulder and settled somewhere behind her ribs. She watched his face instead of the wound. He was focused, completely. The same total attention she had seen him give to the room at the ceremony. The same stillness brought to bear now on 2 inches of torn skin, as though nothing in the kingdom mattered more. There was a small furrow between his brows. His jaw was set. This close, she could see the gray of his eyes had a darker ring at the very edge, and the old pack stories rose up in her, unbidden. An alpha's eyes change when he finds his mate. The gray goes gold. She looked away before he could glance up and catch her looking. "How often does this happen?" he asked. "First time." "In 4 years of climbing frozen rock before dawn." "I was careless." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite agreement. He was cleaning the wound now, the cloth careful along the torn edges, and she kept her breathing even with real effort, because the pain was manageable. His hands were not. "You should not have to do this," he said, quietly, almost to the wound rather than to her. "I chose to." "You chose it because the other choice was worse." He looked up then, directly, the way he had on the ridge, and she held his gaze, because looking away now would tell him more than holding it ever could. "There is a difference," he said, "between a choice a person makes freely, and a choice a person makes because every other road has been closed." The words landed somewhere deep in her chest, and they stayed there, exact, uncomfortable, true. She decided in that moment to stop pretending. She had spent 4 years controlling every word that left her mouth, measuring, hiding. But the fire was warm, and his hands were careful, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was tired of being a locked box. "You want to know why I chose the moss," she said. He went still. "Everyone uses the suppressant herbs," she went on, before she could lose the nerve. "The wolf's bane. It is the obvious thing, the expected thing. And it does the obvious thing." She turned her arm slightly in his grip, watching the firelight move on her own skin. "It muffles the heat. It quiets the scent, but it leaves a trace. Any alpha close enough knows you are suppressing something, and the moment they know you are hiding, you have told them you are worth hiding. It becomes its own kind of advertisement." He had stopped working entirely now. He was simply listening. "The moss leaves no trace," she said. "It does not muffle the signal. It removes it. There is no scent of something hidden. There is just nothing." "It leaves you as nothing," he said. "It leaves me as myself." The words came out sharper than she meant them. She did not take them back. "Without the part of me that gets me treated like a resource," she said. "Without the part that makes men like Vance lean in and decide what I am worth before I have said a single word." She met his eyes. "When I wear the moss, I am not an omega. I am not a prize. I am just a person, standing in a room, the way everyone else gets to be." The fire breathed in the silence. A log shifted. A small spray of spark struck the grate and died. And he was looking at her differently now. She could feel the change without being able to name it. The same quality of attention she had felt at the wall, but stripped of the crowd, stripped of the ceremony, It was somehow more direct, more like weather than like assessment. "I want to understand something," he said, "and I am asking, not demanding." He set the words down carefully with deliberate weight on the difference, and she understood that the difference was the whole point. "What did you think would happen," he said, "if you were ever found as you are?" She thought of Sable, of iron at the wrists and candle flames, and a single word swallowed whole by a watching hall. "You were there 3 nights ago," she said. "You saw how the ceremony works." "I have stood through that ceremony 11 times. "And in 11 ceremonies," she said. "Have you ever once seen an Omega refuse and be heard?" A long pause. "No." "Have you seen an Alpha be refused?" "No." "Then you understand," she said softly, "what the ceremony actually is." He was quiet for a long while after that, long enough that she became aware again of the fire, the slow exhale of burning wood, and of the particular texture of the silence between them. It was not the silence of 2 strangers waiting for a conversation to end. It was something else, something that had weight. "There is a proposal," he said at last. "It has sat in front of the Elder Council for 3 sessions now." She looked up. "It says that no Omega may be bonded without her own stated, witnessed consent." His voice was level, but underneath the level she heard something flatter and harder, the sound of a man whose patience had been spent for a very long time. That any Alpha who attempts a bond bite without consent answers to the law. That the ceremony should be a meeting between equals, not an auction. She stared at him. "They call it dangerous," he said. "They call it a threat to the order of things. Crane calls it that most of all." "He would," she said. And to her surprise, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile. The suggestion of one, there and gone in less than a breath. It did something entirely unreasonable to her heartbeat. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Because you looked at Vance," he said, "the way I look at Crane. And because anyone who has spent 4 years climbing a frozen cliff in the dark just to stay free deserves to know that someone else has finally noticed the problem." She looked down at her own bandaged arm. He had finished it without her noticing. The salve cool and then warm, some old craft she did not know. The linen wound no tighter than it needed to be, the knot set where it would not press against the tender inside of her wrist. He was still holding her forearm, lightly, checking the tension of the wrap with his thumb. He let go. She folded her arm back into her lap and made herself look at the fire instead of at the place where his hands had been. "I have been trespassing on your land for 4 years," she said. "I owe you for the moss." "You owe me nothing." His voice was even. "The border is mine to enforce, or not." A pause. "And I have always known you were there." She went very still. She turned to look at him. He held her gaze without flinching. Steady. Open. "For how long?" she asked. "Since the 2nd season." "You never—" "No." "Why?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because you were harming no one," he said finally. "Because the moss was your solution to a problem that should never have existed in the first place." His eyes were very still on hers. "And because I wanted to know," he said, "if you would ever choose to come here on your own." The fire breathed between them. Outside, somewhere in the waking keep, The first sounds of the morning household had begun to stir. Wood being stacked, a door somewhere, the distant low of the stables. Wren stood up. She needed to move. She needed her hands to have something to do that was not memorizing the warmth of his. And the threat arrived that same afternoon. The way bad weather always seems to arrive the moment you have finally let your guard down. The summons came through proper channels. That was how she knew it was calculated. An elder's formal summons to a presenting Omega was not, technically, refusable, which was, she suspected, the entire point. Crane's receiving room smelled of old wood smoke and was colder than it needed to be. Another calculation. He sat behind a carved desk with the settled stillness of a man who fully expected to be obeyed, and he did not waste time with greeting. "Lord Vance has made inquiries," Crane said. "He finds you suitable. He is prepared to formalize a bond proposal through the proper channels." A pause, gentle, and underneath the gentleness, something with teeth. "This is a significant honor," Crane said, "for someone of your standing." Wren sat with her hands folded in her lap. "I have not been consulted," she said, "regarding my suitability." Crane's expression did not change. "The formalization includes a consultation. You would have the opportunity to express any concerns." To decline? A beat. "To express any concerns," Crane repeated smoothly, "which would be weighed by the council in accordance with tradition." Weighed. She heard the word and turned it over and understood it completely. Not honored, not respected. Weighed. The way you weigh grain. The way you weigh a thing you have already decided to sell. "I understand," she said. She understood far more than he wanted her to. She was back at the fire room before the morning was out. Thorne listened without interrupting, standing at the narrow window with his arms crossed, watching the courtyard below with a stillness she had learned to read now. Not distance. Containment. Something moved through his jaw when she repeated the word "Wade." She watched it move and said nothing, because she was getting better at reading the small language of him. When she finished, he turned from the window. He moved faster than expected, he said. "Vance leaves when the season turns. Crane needs to lock a commitment in place before he goes." "There is trade involved," she said. It was not a guess. "Vance has been offering Crane's counsel something." His silence was its own answer. "Then they are not deciding what is right," she said. "They are deciding what is profitable." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, and then the idea that had been forming in her since the fire the night before finally found its shape. "You said the proposal needs to pass," she said slowly, "that the council calls it dangerous, that they have heard arguments and put it off 3 times. "They have." "Then they have only ever heard it argued," she said, "by people who have never had to stand inside that ceremony and feel what it does." He turned fully toward her now. "The council has never heard from an Omega," she said. "Have they?" A pause. "No," he said. "They have not." "Then let them." Her heart was beating hard, but her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that, fiercely proud of it. "Let me stand in front of them. Let me tell them what the mating moon looks like from inside it, not as a threat, as a witness." For a long moment he did not say anything at all, and the expression that moved across his face was not one she could name right away. It took her until later, walking back through the cold corridor with her bandaged arm held against her chest, to finally understand what she had seen. He had looked, for the space of 3 full seconds, like a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time, and had only just discovered that he was allowed to let it out. The storm came down out of the north without warning. It started as a gray thickening of the sky in the late afternoon, a heaviness, a held breath, and by nightfall, the world had vanished behind a wall of white. Snow fell sideways. The wind howled along the keep walls like something alive and grieving, throwing itself against the old stone again and again, as though it meant to get inside. By morning, the drifts had climbed past the lower windows. The forest between the keep and the cliffs had simply ceased to exist. There was no path. There was no cliff. There was no moss. Wren stood at the narrow window of her room and watched the white erase the only world she had ever been able to depend on. And she understood, with a cold that came from somewhere deep inside her now, exactly what it meant. The compound was gone. She had used the last of it that morning. She had scraped the small clay pot clean with 2 fingers and worked the final traces into the skin of her wrists, knowing even as she did it that it would not last the day. There was no more. There would be no more. The moss lost its power within days of being cut and prepared. It could not be stockpiled. It could not be saved. It had to be fresh, climbed for and ground and mixed within a day or 2, or it was nothing at all. That had always been the cruelty of it. The protection could not be kept. It could only be earned again and again, in the cold, in the dark, on the rock. And the rock was buried now. That could be days. She did not have days. She could already feel it beginning. It started as a warmth low in her body. Faint at first, almost gentle, the way the first ember of a fire is almost gentle before it remembers what it is. A loosening somewhere beneath her ribs. A heat that had nowhere to go and no intention of staying still. Her skin felt suddenly too aware of itself. The wool of her dress felt like far too much against it. And underneath all of it, rising slowly into the air around her for the first time in 4 years, her scent, her real one, the thing she had buried so long and so completely that she had almost convinced herself it had never belonged to her at all. She pressed her back to the cold stone wall and tried to breathe through it. In through the nose, 4 counts, out through the mouth, 4 counts. The old discipline. The thing that had saved her on 100 frozen ledges in the dark, when one loud breath could have been the end of everything. It did nothing, because this was not fear. Fear she knew how to manage. Fear could be folded small and tucked away and breathed through. But this was something else entirely. This was her own body, arriving at last, claiming back the years she had stolen from it. And there was no count in the world, no discipline, no frozen morning of practice that could send it quietly back into hiding. Down in the lower halls of the keep, an alpha lifted his head. He did not know why. He only knew that the air had changed, that something warm and sweet and impossibly alive had begun to thread its way through the cold stone corridors, curling under doors, rising through the old passages, and that every instinct he owned had snapped awake all at once. He was not the only one. Wren did not see it happen, but she felt the keep change around her, the way you feel a held breath enter a quiet room. doors that had been still, footsteps in corridors that had no honest reason for footsteps, the particular charged silence of a building full of predators who had all, in the same single moment, caught the same thread on the same current of air. She had spent her entire life avoiding this exact thing, and now there was nowhere left to climb. She made a decision in that small cold room, and she made it standing up. For 4 years she had run. 4 years of scraping silver moss off frozen rock before the sun rose. 4 years of making herself into nothing so that no one could ever lean in and decide what she was worth before she had spoken a single word. And it had kept her safe. She would not pretend otherwise. It had kept her whole. But it had also hidden her so well, for so long, that even she had begun to lose the girl underneath. She was so tired of running. She was so tired of being nothing. If this was the day the world finally found her, then it would find her on her feet, not pressed into a corner, not folded down into the smallest possible shape, not the way Sable had knelt all those years ago, with iron on her wrists and the whole hall watching. She opened her door and stepped out into the corridor, and the cold air struck her flushed skin like a current, and her own scent moved with her, and there was no taking it back now. The corridor was empty, but it would not stay empty. She could hear the keep stirring around her, drawn the way iron filings are drawn across a table toward a hidden stone, pulled toward the thing she could no longer keep buried. She turned toward the one part of this vast cold place where she had ever once felt like a person and not a prize. She turned toward the fire room. She did not make it. A shape filled the far end of the corridor, broad, slow, moving with the deliberate, unhurried certainty of an alpha who had caught a scent and already decided it belonged to him, not Thorn, one of Vance's men, left behind when the delegation could not travel through the storm. His eyes had gone half wild already. His nostrils flared as he breathed her in. "There you are," he said softly. Ren went still. The old instinct screamed at her to fold, to shrink, to vanish into the smallest version of herself she could become. But there was nothing left to vanish into now. The moss was gone. The nothing was gone. There was only her, standing in a cold corridor, exposed for the first time in 4 years. So she lifted her chin instead. She held her ground, and her heart slammed against her ribs as the man took one slow, deliberate step toward her, the want in him rolling ahead of him like heat off a stone. Then, the temperature dropped. She felt it before she understood it. That same cold she had felt on the cliff at dawn. The same cold she had felt against the pillar in the great hall. Rolling down the corridor now like the front edge of a second storm, one with nothing to do with snow. And Thorn was there. He did not run. He never ran. He simply arrived, the way weather arrives, stepping out of the cross corridor into the narrow space between Ren and the other man. And the entire quality of the air bent around him. He did not raise his voice. "She is under my protection," he said. That was all, but his wolf was in it. The whole crushing weight of it. The room seemed to lean away from him, and the other alpha, wild-eyed and breathing hard and half lost to instinct, took one long look at the king of Ironwood standing between him and the thing he wanted, and lowered his eyes, and backed away, and was gone. The corridor went very quiet. And then it was only the two of them. Thorn turned, and Wren saw his eyes. They were not gray. They were gold. She had read the old pack stories her whole life. She knew exactly what the color meant, and some part of her, some quiet part she had been carefully refusing to look at for weeks now, had known this was coming. She had felt it building in the morning fire room conversations, in the careful warmth of his hands on a bandaged arm, in the way he always seemed to know where she was, in which corridor, before she ever made a sound. She had simply not known it would happen like this. In a cold passage, with her scent unmasked and rising, with her own body burning low and bright and her control worn thinner than it had ever been in her life. Wren. The way he said her name was different now. She felt it in her sternum, in her wrists, in the hollow at the base of her throat where the moss compound used to sit, and where there was now simply nothing at all left to hide her. Her own wolf was on her feet. Had been, she realized, since the gold first appeared in his eyes. "You should not be near me right now," she said. Her voice came out lower than she meant it to. "I know. My scent. I know." His jaw was set so hard she could see the muscle working along the bone of it. "Believe me, I know better than you think." He did not come closer. That was the first thing she truly understood about that moment. And it was the thing she would carry with her for the rest of her life. He did not come closer. Every instinct in him was straining toward her. She could see it. She could feel it pouring off him in waves of that low forge heat. The want of him so strong it had a presence of its own in the corridor, a gravity, a pull. His hands had curled into fists at his sides. His breathing had lost its even rhythm. The most controlled man she had ever known was, for the first time, visibly holding himself together by raw force of will. And he did not take a single step toward her. "Come with me," he said, "away from the others. Somewhere you will be safe until this passes." "Safe from them," she said, "or safe from you?" The question came out before she could stop it, and something flickered across his face, pain almost, or something very near it. "From all of it," he said quietly, "including me. If that is what you need from me tonight, then that is what you will have." She went with him. He led her through the back corridors of the keep, the old quiet ones, away from the stirring halls and the drawn, restless men the storm had trapped inside the walls. He walked half a step ahead of her the whole way. He did not touch her once. He was careful, she noticed, even now, even like this, to leave a clear space between them, to keep his hands always where she could see them. He brought her to the fire room, her chair, her fire. The one place in this whole enormous, freezing keep that had ever felt like it might be hers. And then he crossed to the far side of it and stood by the door, with the heavy work table set between them like a thing he had placed there on purpose. The fire had burned low. He built it up. The light rose gold and warm across the old stone, and for a long while neither of them said anything at all, and the only sounds in the room were the storm flinging itself against the walls and the slow, patient exhale of the burning wood. Wren sat down in the chair. She pressed her hands flat against her own knees and tried to remember how to breathe. The heat in her had not faded. If anything, it had grown, here in the warmth, with the scent of him filling the small room. that deep, clean scent of pine and snow, and something darker beneath it, something that made her whole body lean toward him without ever once asking her permission. This was the thing she had feared her entire life, the wanting, the terrible way her own body could reach for something and turn the reaching into a cage. She had watched it happen to Sable in the old hall, the heat called a gift, the desire called a blessing, the whole thing dressed up as honor, while a girl wept on her knees. She had built 4 cold years on a single certainty. That desire, once seen, would be used against her, and here she was, wanting, unmasked, burning, with the most powerful alpha in the north standing 10 feet away with gold in his eyes and his hands and fists. By every rule she had ever lived by, she was already lost. "Why are you all the way over there?" she heard herself ask. His knuckles were white against the door frame. "Because if I come any closer," he said very low, "I am not certain I can promise you the distance I want to be able to promise you." She should have been afraid of that. She waited for the fear to come. It did not come. "Tell me something," she said. "When you look at me right now, like this, with your eyes the way they are." She swallowed. "What is it that you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was rough at the edges in a way she had never heard from him. "I want to cross this room," he said, "and I want to never let you walk out of it again." The raw honesty of it stole the breath right out of her. "And what are you going to do?" she whispered. "Nothing," he said, "until you ask." The word landed in the warm air between them and simply stayed there, and something inside Wren that had been clenched tight as a fist for 4 long years began, very slowly, to come undone. Because here was the thing she had never once been offered in the whole of her life. A choice. Her body was burning. Her wolf was straining forward toward him. Every instinct the storm had uncovered was pulling her across that room, and he could feel it, and he wanted it with everything that he was. And still he stood by the door, and still he waited, and still he set the entire weight of what came next down into her open hands. "You could have it," she said. Her voice shook now, though not with fear, not anymore. "You know you could. Right now, like this, I do not think I would even stop you. I do not think my own body would let me." "I know," he said. "Then why won't you?" And he looked at her with those gold eyes, and his answer was the same one he had given her once, over a bandaged arm, by this same fire. Only now it meant everything in the world. "You remember what I told you?" he said, low, "about a choice freely made, and a choice with every other road closed. Your own body cornering you is just one more closed road, Wren, one more wall, and I will not walk through a door that fear opened, or the heat opened, or the storm opened. Not with you, not ever. I would rather wait the whole rest of my life for you to choose me with a clear mind and an open eye, than have you for one night because the snow left you nowhere else to stand." The fire cracked sharply in the grate. The storm howled on against the stone, and Wren sat very still in her chair, with her whole body burning and her eyes suddenly filling with tears she could not entirely explain. And she felt something shift inside her so deeply that she knew with absolute certainty that it could never shift back. Because she finally understood the difference, not as words, not as a clever principle to be argued in front of a council of old men, as a thing she could feel in her own flesh. The wanting was hers, the heat was hers, the reaching toward him was hers, and no one else's. And for the first time in her entire life, none of it was a trap. None of it could be turned against her. He had taken the oldest weapon in the world, the one that had been used on every Omega who had ever knelt on that cold stone floor, the one that had been used on Sable while a hall full of people called it beautiful, and he had laid it down, deliberately, completely. He had handed her own body back to her. "I'm not going to ask tonight," she said at last. Her voice was steadier now, stronger than it had been in days. "Not because I do not want to. You know that I want to." She wiped her eyes with the back of her bandaged wrist and let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something else. "But because the first time I ever choose this, I want to choose it as myself, not as a woman the storm happened to catch. I want to be able to look back years from now and know without any doubt at all that it was mine." Something moved through Thorn's face, something vast and quiet, like a mountain shifting in its sleep, expressed in nothing more than a single muscle at the corner of his mouth. "Then we wait," he said, "as long as you need, however long that turns out to be." And he stayed by the door all night. He did not cross the room, not once. He built the fire up each time it burned low, and he kept the careful space between them. And when the worst of the heat moved through her in long, burning, helpless waves, he spoke to her in that low, steady voice about nothing of any consequence at all. About the map spread across his table, about the old borders of the north, about the way the storm would surely break by morning, and the cliffs would open again, and the world would right itself, anchoring her, keeping her tethered to the person she was, and not only to the body the storm had uncovered. By the gray edge of dawn, the wind had finally died. The fire had burned down to soft embers, and Wren had fallen asleep at last in the chair, wrapped in a heavy cloak that smelled of pine and snow and him. A cloak she did not remember him laying over her, placed so gently, so carefully, that it had not so much as stirred her from sleep. Across the room, Thorn sat with his back against the door he had refused to let himself walk through. His eyes were still gold. They would stay gold for a long time now. He understood that. There was no going back from what his wolf had found. And for the first time in more years than he could easily count, the patience he had carried in his chest like a cold stone did not feel like a weight at all. It felt like a promise, one he fully intended to keep. The storm broke on the third day. The wind died first, then the snow thinned and slowed, and finally stopped altogether. And a thin, cold sun came up over a world buried in white and absolute silence. The drifts began to settle. Water dripped from the eaves of the keep in a slow, patient rhythm. The first sound the world had made in days that was not the wind. The cliffs would open again soon. The moss would be there, waiting under its blanket of snow. Wren stood at her window and watched the icicles drip and understood that her old life was waiting for her too. She could go back to it. She could climb again, harvest again, vanish again into her careful nothing. The storm had been a single terrible night. It did not have to change anything, except that it had changed everything. and she knew it. Vance found her the morning the path to the lower hall finally cleared. He had been trapped in the keep by the storm, the same as everyone. But where the other alphas had spent those days restless and frustrated, Vance had spent them thinking. She could see it in him the moment he stepped into the small side room where she had gone to be alone. He had the look of a man who had used the silence to sharpen a knife. "You were unmasked," he said. "No greeting, no pretense. 3 nights ago, the whole keep felt it, including me." Ren said nothing. She had learned long ago that some situations were not improved by words. "I have wondered about you since the ceremony hall," Vance went on. He walked slowly into the room, the way he always walked, as though the room owed him space. "That interesting absence you wore, that locked box, and then, for one night, the box came open." He stopped a few feet from her. His eyes were pale, colder than thorns by a quality she felt more than measured. "Do you know what you are, girl?" he asked softly. "Do you actually know? Or have your elders kept it from you the way they keep everything from your kind?" She kept her face still. "There is an old bloodline," Vance said. "Very old, very rare. They called it Moonfire in the days when anyone still remembered. An Omega line whose scent stirs an Alpha's wolf even through suppression, even through your little silver moss. Most of the line died out generations ago." He tilted his head. "Most of it." The cold settled into Ren differently than cold usually did. Not the clean cold of the cliff face. Something murkier. "You do not know what you are," Vance said, and he smiled, slow and certain. "But I do. And do you understand what a bond to a Moonfire line is worth? To a man of standing? What it would mean? The status. The blood carried forward." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I have wanted very few things in my life that I did not eventually get." "I am not a thing to be gotten," Ren said. It was the first thing she had said, and her voice did not shake, and she was fiercely proud of that. "No?" Vance studied her. "Then let me speak plainly, so there is no confusion between us." And he told her the price. Her home pack, the southern pack she had come from, was small, poor. It survived on trade, and a great deal of that trade ran through the coastal routes that Vance controlled. He laid it out for her the way a man lays out a hand of cards he already knows will win. If she resisted him, if she made this difficult, if she hid behind the king's new ideas about consent, then the trade would close, the routes would shut, and the small poor pack she had come from, the people she had grown up among, would not survive the next hard winter. "You could spare them all of that," Vance said gently, "simply by being reasonable, by coming to me willingly, before this foolish proposal of the king's complicates things. One small choice from you, and everyone you grew up with stays warm and fed." He let that sit. "Or you can be stubborn," he said, "and learn what your freedom costs other people." Then he inclined his head, with the precise minimum of courtesy the gesture required, and he left her alone in the cold room with the weight of it. It was a clever trap. Ren understood that even as it closed around her. It was, in its way, more clever than anything that had ever been done to Sable. No iron cuffs, no public ceremony, just a quiet arithmetic that turned her freedom into a weapon and pointed it at the people she loved. She sat down slowly on the edge of the cold hearth, and for the first time in a very long time, she let herself think about the river. The old plan rose up in her, worn smooth from years of handling. She had built it on 100 frozen mornings, turning it over in her mind the way some people turn over a worry stone. If she was ever truly cornered, she would go north. Cross the gray water before the spring thaw made it impassable. Find a settlement small enough and far enough that no one would ask what she was, or where she had come from, or why a young woman traveled alone in winter. Disappear. For real, this time. Forever. She had never once actually gone. And sitting there on the cold stone, she finally understood why. It was not only fear that had kept her, it was something she had refused all these years to look at directly. If she crossed the river, she would be safe, and Vance would simply find another girl. The trade would close on her pack anyway, or it would not, but Vance himself would not stop. Men like Vance never stopped. He would go to the next ceremony and the next hall, and somewhere a girl who had never learned to climb a cliff in the dark would kneel on a cold stone floor with iron at her wrists and say one small word that no one would hear, the way Sable had, and Wren would be far away across the gray water, warm, safe, invisible, free, and free of any way to ever look at herself again. She had a visitor that evening. Tamsin came without being summoned, the way she always did, blunt and warm and entirely unbothered by the fact that her oldest friend was sitting alone in the dark. "You look," Tamsin said, settling onto the hearth beside her, "like a woman doing arithmetic she does not like the answer to." "That is exactly what I am doing." Tamsin was a beta. She did not carry the heat, or the fear, or the long shadow of the mating moon. But she had known Wren since they were children, and she could read all the places where the careful surface showed its seams. "You could just go," Tamsin said quietly, after Wren had told her everything. "North, like you always said you would. No one here could stop you. No one here could even follow fast enough." "I know. You would be free of all of it. Vance, Crane, the whole rotten ceremony. I know that too." "But," said Tamsin, and Wren looked into the low fire for a long moment before she answered. "But then I spend the rest of my life knowing I had a voice," she said slowly, "and I used it to save only myself. And the next girl gets the iron and the candle flames, and the one after her. And it never stops, because no one who could change it ever stays long enough to change it." She turned to look at her friend. "I am so tired of running, Tamsin," she said. "I have been running since I was 12. I am tired of being nothing. And I think I would rather be afraid and stand still than be safe and spend the rest of my life running away from a girl I left kneeling on the floor." Tamsin was quiet a long time. "That," she said finally, "is the most dangerous thing I have ever heard you say." "Yes, and the bravest." Wren let out a breath that shook only a little. "Then help me," she said, "because I am going to need to do this exactly right." She did not go to Thorn to ask permission. She went to him to tell him what she had already decided. She found him in the fire room, and she stood across the work table from him, and she told him about Vance, the bloodline, the threat to her pack, the two roads. And she watched something cold and dangerous move behind his eyes as she spoke, watched his hands go very still against the maps. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I could end this tonight," he said. His voice had gone low and flat. "I could have Vance out of these walls by morning. I could close his roots the way he threatens to close your packs. I have the power to crush him, Wren. Say the word, and it is done." And here was the moment. She could feel it. He was offering to carry it for her, to take the whole terrible weight off her shoulders and break it himself, the way a powerful man breaks things for the woman he has chosen. It would be so easy to let him, and it would make her, in the end, exactly what Vance believed her to be. A thing that other people decided the fate of. "No," she said. He went still. "If you fight Vance for me, then this is your victory," she said. "And the next time a man like him comes for a girl like me, she will need a king of her own to save her. And most girls do not have one." She stepped closer to the table. "I do not want you to win this for me," she said. "I want to win it in front of the council, in my own words. I want them to pass that proposal because an Omega stood in front of them and made it impossible to look away. Not because the king grew angry on one woman's behalf." For a long moment, Thorne said nothing at all, and then something moved through his face that she had not expected. Not frustration, not the wounded pride of a powerful man told to stand down. Pride in her. He looked at her standing there, plain and tired and absolutely unmovable, and his gold eyes held something that looked almost like awe. "You understand," he said slowly, "that you are choosing the harder road, by a very great distance. Yes, that I cannot promise you it will work. The council is old, Crane is patient, and Vance is not a man who loses gracefully. I know all of that. And you mean to do it anyway." "I mean to do it anyway," she said, "because I am done being a question that other people get to answer." The corner of his mouth moved, that faint suggestion of a smile, there and gone. "Then I will give you the room," he said, "and nothing more. The words will be yours." And so she prepared. She spent the long, cold nights before the council session at the work table, by the low fire, with a stub of candle and a stack of rough parchment. She did not write a speech. Speeches, she had decided, performed. They asked to be admired. She did not want to be admired. She wanted to be impossible to ignore. So instead, she wrote down what she knew. She wrote about a girl on a raised floor, without naming her, and the iron at her wrists, and the one word she had said that no one had heard. She wrote about the difference between weighing a person's concerns and honoring them. She wrote about 4 years of frozen mornings and silver moss, and what it meant that the only solution she had ever been able to find to a problem that should never have existed was to erase herself completely. She wrote about the price of being free. And late one night, with the candle burned down to almost nothing, she came at last to the bloodline, the moonfire, the thing Vance wanted, the thing that made her valuable, in the eyes of men who measured women in value. She sat with the parchment a long time over that one, because she understood now that Vance meant to use it against her in the council, to frame her as a rare prize, a bloodline to be secured, a thing too precious to be left to her own foolish choices. He would turn the secret into a cage, unless she got there first, unless she took the thing he meant to weaponize and spoke it herself, in her own voice, on her own terms, turned it from a prize to be claimed into a person who refused to be claimed. Wren dipped the pen, and on the last clean line of the parchment, in a steady hand, she wrote the words she would say if Vance forced the matter. Then let me tell you what I am, so that no one in this room friggin' gets to decide it for me. She set the pen down. She blew out the candle. And in the dark, for the first time since she was 12 years old, she did not feel like something hiding from the world. She felt like something about to walk straight into the middle of it. The council chamber had been built for judgment. Wren understood it the moment the heavy doors opened. A long table of dark wood, 6 high-backed chairs along its sides, and one at its head. Tall, narrow windows that let in thin gray light and very little warmth. Candles in iron stands that threw more shadow than glow. The whole room had the cold, patient feel of a place where decisions were made about people who were not allowed to speak in their own defense. The 6 elders were already seated when she came in. Crane sat at the head, and along the far wall, where no chairs had been set, Lord Vance stood waiting. He had not come alone. 3 of his own senior alphas flanked him, broad and silent, arranged with the deliberate care of men who wished to be counted. It was not a delegation. It was a show of force. Wren saw all of it in a single breath, and her heart climbed high and hard into her throat. And then she walked in anyway. She walked in on her own. Thorn had come with her as far as the doors, and there he had stopped, the way he had promised he would, and let her cross the threshold by herself. She wore plain wool, no silver thread, no braided hair, nothing that performed, nothing that asked, nothing that could be accused of trying to sway a single soul in that cold room. She carried her rough parchment in one steady hand. She had decided that plain wool could not be dismissed as a girl trying to be chosen. Plain wool could only be listened to. Crane's eyes found her, and for just a moment before he smoothed it away, she saw the surprise on his face. He had not expected her, and that, more than anything, told her she had come to the right room. "This is irregular," Crane said. His voice was dry and cold as the stone. "The council did not summon this Omega." "The king did," said Thorn from the doorway. He did not come in. He stood at the threshold with his arms loose at his sides, and he did not raise his voice. And somehow the whole room shifted to make space for him anyway. "She has asked to speak before this council," Thorn said, "on the matter of the consent proposal, and she will be heard." Crane's jaw tightened, but there was nothing he could say to that, not with the king standing in the doorway, and so he gestured stiffly toward the foot of the long table. Wren walked to it, and before she could draw the breath to begin, Vance moved first. "Before the girl performs her little speech," Vance said smoothly, stepping forward from the wall, "the council should be reminded of where the law actually stands today." He turned to the elders. He had the easy confidence of a man who had argued in many rooms and lost in very few. "The consent proposal is not law," he said. "It has not passed. It is an idea. A pleasant idea, perhaps, but an idea only. And under the laws that do govern us, the laws that have governed every pack in the North for 200 years, a formal bond claim, properly witnessed, properly offered through an elder of standing, is binding." He let that settle. I have made such a claim, Vance said, through Elder Crane. For this Omega, before the storm, before any of this. The cold in the room deepened. Wren felt it close around her like water. And there is more the council should know, Vance went on, and now he turned to look directly at her, and his pale eyes were bright with the certainty of a man laying down a winning card. This is no ordinary Southern girl. She carries an old bloodline, a Moonfire line, the last of it, by my reckoning. A murmur went around the table. The elders leaned forward. She watched their eyes change, watched the calculation begin, watched herself transform in their faces from a girl in plain wool into something rare, something valuable, something too precious to be wasted on her own foolish choices. A bloodline like that is not a private matter, Vance said. It is a question of the future of the packs, of blood carried forward. It is far too important to be left to the whims of a single frightened girl. He spread his hands, reasonable, regretful. I claim her under the old law. And I would remind the king that even he cannot simply set aside 200 years of binding custom because a new idea pleases him, or because a particular woman does. It was a masterstroke. Wren understood that, standing there with her heart pounding. He had not come to argue against the proposal. He had come to make it irrelevant, to claim her under the old law before the new one could exist, and to dress it up as duty, as the good of the packs, as something too large and too important for her small voice to touch. She could feel the room tilting toward him. She could feel herself disappearing again. Not behind Moss this time, behind their idea of what she was worth. From the doorway, Thorn had gone absolutely still. His wolf was screaming at him to move. Every instinct he owned was straining to cross that room, to put himself between Vance and the woman his blood had already chosen, to end this with the full weight of everything he was. He had the power. He could break Vance and his 3 silent alphas and the old law all at once, here, now, with a single word. And it would cost her everything she had come here to win. So he held the threshold. He kept his hands at his sides. He kept his mouth shut. And he did the single hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He let her stand alone in the middle of the room because she had asked him to, because it had to be hers, because a man who truly loved her did not save her from the fight she had chosen. He guarded the door, and he trusted her to win. Wren set her parchment down on the table. She did not look at it again. Lord Vance is right about one thing, she said. Her voice came out clear and steady, and it carried in the cold room the way her footsteps had carried in the great hall, doubled, returned. Every head turned toward her. The consent proposal is not law yet, she said, and the old law is binding. He is right about that. She let it sit. So let me speak to the law he wants to use. Let me tell this council exactly what it does, from inside it, because not one person at this table has ever had to stand where it puts a woman. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. There was a girl, she said, years ago, in a hall much like the Great Hall here. She was 17 years old. Her heat had risen early, and the elders called that a gift, and they braided flowers into her hair and called her blessed. The room had gone very quiet. She knelt on a raised floor with iron around her wrists, Wren said. And when the Alpha who had been chosen for her stepped forward, she said one word. She said no. A pause, and the elder kept speaking, and the Alpha kept walking, and the whole hall kept watching. And when it was done, when she screamed loud enough to shake the candle flames, the people in that room turned to one another and called it beautiful. Somewhere down the table, an elder shifted in his chair. "That is the law Lord Vance wants to use," Wren said. "That is what binding means, when the person being bound is never once asked. It means a girl can say no in front of 100 people and have it count for nothing at all." She turned slowly and let her eyes move across each face at the table. "I have spent 4 years climbing a frozen cliff in the dark," she said, "before dawn, in winter, to harvest a moss that erases my scent so completely that no Alpha could find me, or claim me, or call me his. 4 years. I made myself into nothing. I gave up the smell of my own skin, because that was the only way I could find in the whole world to keep this exact moment from happening to me." Her voice did not waver. "Ask yourselves what kind of law makes a girl do that. Ask yourselves what kind of honor sends a child up a cliff in the dark to disappear rather than stand in your hall and be celebrated." The silence in the room had changed. It was no longer the cold, patient silence of a verdict already reached. It was the silence of people who had stopped being able to look away. And then Wren did the thing she had decided late one night by a burned-down candle. She reached into the place Vance had meant to use as a cage, and she took the key for herself. "Lord Vance says I carry a rare bloodline," she said. "He says it as though it settles the matter, as though it makes me too valuable to be left to my own choices, as though a moonfire line is a thing to be secured, like a trade route or a herd." She looked straight at Vance now. "So let me tell you what I am," she said. "Myself, in my own voice, so that no one in this room ever again gets to decide it for me." Vance's expression flickered. This was not the script he had written. "Yes," Wren said, "the blood is old. Yes, it is rare. Lord Vance is correct, and he is correct that it means something." She turned back to the council. "It means that when men like him look at me, their wolves want what they cannot name. It means I have spent my whole life being wanted for a thing I did not choose and cannot give away and never once asked to carry." "He calls that value," she said. "I call it the exact reason this proposal has to pass. Because if a rare bloodline cannot say no, then no bloodline can. If the most wanted woman in the North can be claimed against her will and called duty, then every woman in every pack is a herd, and every ceremony is an auction, and every no is just a sound we make before someone walks toward us anyway." Her voice rang now, clear and unafraid. "I am not a future to be secured," she said. "I am not a line of blood to be carried forward. I am a person, standing in this room, and I am telling you, in my own words, with my own voice, that I do not consent to him, to this, to being decided. Now write a law that means I am allowed to say so." The room did not move. For a long moment, nothing in it moved at all. And then Thorne stepped through the doorway. He crossed to the head of the table, and he did not look at Vance, and he did not look at Crane. He looked at the 6 elders, one by one, and when he spoke, his voice was low and even and it had the particular weight of banked coals built slowly into flame. The old law has held this kingdom together for 200 years, he said. I have heard that argument in this room 3 times. I have been patient. I have revised. I have compromised on every clause that compromise could serve. There is one clause I will not compromise on, he said, that no person under the protection of this kingdom may be bonded without her own free, stated, witnessed consent. That is not a radical idea, Thorne said. It is the oldest idea there is, that a king protects the people in his care, and I have just watched the bravest person in this keep stand alone in this room and ask you for nothing more than the right to refuse a man who would take her against her will. His eyes moved to Crane. The proposal passes, he said. I would prefer the council's vote. I have asked for it patiently, for a long time, but understand that I will pass it tonight with the vote or under royal decree, because I will not stand in a kingdom where what I just watched is called law. The silence stretched, and then, slowly, the oldest elder at the table, a man who had not spoken once the entire session, raised his weathered hand. In support, he said quietly. Wren's breath caught. A second hand rose. A third. The elder beside Crane, after a long moment, lifted his. A fourth. A fifth. And then it was only Crane. He sat very still at the head of the table, his cold eyes moving from Wren to Thorne to Vance, standing rigid against the wall with his 3 silent alphas and his master stroke crumbling around him. She watched Crane make the final calculation of a man deciding whether to hold a losing position or cut his losses while he still could. In support, he said. It passed. It passed completely. Vance moved then, one sharp step forward, his easy confidence finally cracking. This is absurd. A bloodline of that significance cannot simply be, "You are standing in my keep," Thorne said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He turned at last to face Vance fully, and the gold in his eyes was very bright, and the whole room felt the floor of his patience finally give way. "You came into my council," Thorne said, "with 3 of your alphas at your back, to claim a woman against her stated will, under a law I have just struck down. You attempted to use her own blood as a chain, and you did all of it in front of me." A pause. "Leave by morning. Take your men. And understand that your trade routes through the southern passes are, as of tonight, the king's concern. They will stay open. The southern pack will not suffer for one woman's courage." His voice dropped low and final. "But if I ever hear that you have attempted a bond claim against any woman in any territory under my law without her witnessed consent, you will answer to me, personally, and I will not be patient." Vance held his gaze for a long, taut moment, the calculation of an alpha deciding whether the ground he stood on was worth dying for. It was not. He inclined his head with the precise minimum of courtesy the moment demanded, and he turned, and he walked out, his 3 silent alphas falling in behind him. The heavy doors closed, and it was done. In the corridor outside the council chamber, Wren stopped walking and put her back against the cold stone wall and simply breathed. Her hands were shaking now that it was over, now that they were allowed to. She heard his footsteps behind her. "Wren." She turned. Thorne stood a few feet away, no closer, and he was looking at her the way he had looked at her in the fire room with the storm at the walls, only there was something new in it now, something that made her chest ache. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. A single, slight motion. "That was yours," he said. "All of it. I only guarded the door." And Wren looked at him, in the thin gray light of the corridor, with her hands still shaking, and her voice still ringing in her own ears, and understood that for the first time in her entire life, she had not disappeared. She had stood in the most dangerous room in the North, with every reason to vanish, and she had let herself be seen instead. The first snow of the new season came in the night. Wren woke to a world gone quiet. She lay still for a moment in the dark, in the warm furs of her own bed, and listened to the particular silence that fresh snow makes, the way it swallows every sound and hands back a different kind of stillness, softer, older. A hush that feels less like absence and more like the whole world holding something gently in its hands, the way you might hold a sleeping child or a thing you were afraid of breaking. It was her room now, not the ceremony lodge, not a borrowed corner of someone else's keep. A room of her own, high in the western tower, with a deep window that looked out toward the cliffs. The oversight work had changed that months ago. A real position came with a real place to live, and the place had become, slowly, a home. She did not reach for the moss. That was the thing she noticed first, every single morning now. The way you notice the absence of a pain you carried so long, you stopped knowing it was a pain. Her hand did not drift toward the clay pot on the washstand. There was no clay pot. There had not been one for a long time. She simply lay there, in her own skin, smelling of her own self, and no one was coming to take anything from her for it. It had taken her a while to believe that. Far longer than the council session, far longer than the ink had taken to dry on the law itself. For weeks after the proposal passed, she had still woken at the gray edge of dawn, with her hand reaching for protection that was no longer there. Her body braced, her breath already counting. In through the nose, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. The old discipline, rising up out of habit, trying to save her from a danger that had quietly ceased to exist. The fear had been with her since she was 12. It did not leave all at once. Fear like that never does. But it was leaving. She had thought once that giving up the moss would feel like loss. The moss had kept her whole for 4 years. It had been the one thing she could count on, the strategy she had carried across 100 frozen mornings, the silver thread between her and a fate she had watched destroy another girl. Instead, it felt like setting down something terribly heavy, something she had carried for so long that she had forgotten her own arms could be empty, forgotten what it was to walk without the weight of it dragging at her, forgotten what her own shoulders felt like when they were not braced against the next thing. The oversight work was not ceremonial. She had made certain of that before she ever accepted it. She had sat across the work table from Thorne, in the fire room that had once been the only place in the world where she felt like a person, and she had told him plainly that she would not take a position that existed only to make the new law look kind. She would take it only if it had teeth. Only if her word actually moved things. Only if it was real. The position is not ceremonial, he had said. I would not accept a ceremonial position. No, he had answered. with that faint suggestion of a smile that still did unreasonable things to her heartbeat. I did not think you would. So now the work was real, and it filled her days. The ceremony itself had changed. The mating moon still came when the season turned, the way it always had. But it was a different thing now, underneath the old name. No iron cuffs, no raised floor, no circle of alphas breathing in frightened girls and calling the fear in their eyes a blessing. The young omegas came, and the alphas came, and instead of an auction, there was a meeting. They spoke, they listened, and every single one of them, every girl in pale wool, knew without any doubt at all that she was allowed to walk away. And it was Wren who made certain they knew it. She stood at those ceremonies now, not as a girl folding herself small against the wall, but as the woman who walked the room and met each frightened gaze and said, with her own voice, the words no one had said to her when she was young. You do not have to choose anyone tonight. There was a girl, late in the season, who reminded her so much of herself that it stopped her breath. Her name was Lynette. She was young, 16 perhaps. She came to the ceremony with her hair unbound and her eyes too wide, and her hands twisting in the folds of her skirt, and she found a place against the outer wall and made herself small, so small, taking up only the space she absolutely required, drawing nothing at all toward her. Wren knew that posture. She had invented that posture once on a cold cliff in the dark, with a harvesting knife in one hand and a linen sack in the other. She crossed the hall to the girl, not as an official, with a stylus and a list of names. She crossed it as a woman who had stood in exactly that spot, against exactly that wall, with exactly that fear. And she stopped beside Lynette, and she did not loom over her, and she did not push. You do not have to choose anyone tonight, Wren said quietly. You know that, yes? Lynette looked at her with the particular fear of a girl who has been handed a comforting thing she does not dare let herself believe. They said that, she whispered, but they always say things, and then the things are not true. They do, Wren agreed, and often they are not. And then she told her the truth, not the pretty version, the real one, with teeth. She told Lynette that there was a law now, that no alpha in this hall could touch her, claim her, lay so much as a hand on her, without her leave. She told her that if a single one of them tried, there was a king and a council, and a woman in plain wool who would make him answer for it, personally. Your no is not a sound you make, Wren said, before someone walks toward you anyway. Not here, not anymore. Your no is the end of the conversation. Lynette's eyes filled. And if you do not want any of them, Wren went on, gently, then you go home tonight exactly as free as you came in. And you come back next season, if you like, or you never come back at all. And no one in the whole North decides that but you. You promise, Lynette said. It was not quite a question. I do more than promise, Wren said. I built it. She did not explain the cliff, the 4 years of frozen dawns, the silver moss, or the way she had given up the smell of her own skin to keep this exact moment from happening to her. The girl did not need the weight of all that, but something eased in Lynette's narrow shoulders, some old braced tension that Wren recognized in her own bones. The bracing of a body that has learned too early to expect the worst. and the girl stood a little straighter against the cold stone wall, and took up a little more space in the world, and breathed. That was the moment, Wren thought afterward, that she finally understood what the whole long fight had been for. Not for herself, not only for the loosening of one frightened girl's shoulders against a wall, for a no that finally got to mean no. She had been afraid for so long that nothing could ever undo what she had watched happen to Sable in that old hall, that some wounds simply stayed open forever. And maybe that was true. Maybe Sable's wound would never fully close. Some things, once broken, stay broken. But Wren had learned something in the quiet months since the council. You cannot go back and save the girl who knelt on the floor, but you can stand between the next one and the iron. And in a strange and unexpected way, doing the second thing began, slowly, to ease the ache of the first. Not erase it, never erase it, but ease it. The way warmth eases a cold that has settled too deep in the bones to ever fully leave. From a little distance, on those ceremony nights, Thorn watched her work. He never interfered. He had learned, the hard way, in a cold council chamber, what it cost to take a fight from her that was hers to win. So he stood apart, and he watched the woman in plain wool move through a room full of frightened girls and hand each of them the one thing he had wanted to hand her and had not been able to, that first night against the pillar. The knowledge that she was allowed to refuse. He had loved her, he thought, since long before he had let himself name it. Since the second season she came climbing his cliffs in the dark, a small determined shape against the gray, stealing a freedom the world should have simply given her. He had spent years not reaching for her, years learning the discipline of wanting something and refusing to take it. And now he understood that all of that waiting had been for this, not to win her, to be there, steady and unmovable, on the day she finally chose to be won. She tested him. She could not help it. She was not entirely sure she wanted to help it. For all that she had chosen this, for all that she had stood in the council chamber with her hands shaking and reclaimed her own voice in front of men who measured women in value, some old wary part of her still waited for the catch, still expected the patience to run out, still braced in the small hours for the day the careful distance would close all at once and reveal itself to have been a strategy all along. So she tested it, the way you test ice on a winter pond before you trust your weight to it. She pulled back in the moments when things between them threatened to become easy. She went quieter. She went cooler. She let whole days pass where she was distant for no reason she could have named aloud, and she watched with that old animal wariness to see whether his warmth had conditions hidden inside it. It did not. He simply continued. He kept the fire room available. He said her name with the same low, attentive steadiness, whether she had been warm to him the day before or had barely spoken 3 words. He did not push. He did not sulk. He did not make her pay for the distance with a coldness of his own, the way she had braced for, the way the world had taught her to expect. He was, day after day, exactly what he had been, present, patient, and slowly, the way the new snow had buried the cliffs inch by quiet inch, a different understanding settled over her. Some things are what they are, even when you test them, especially when you test them. She found him on the upper path above the eastern cliff. It was the path where she had first looked up and seen him against the gray sky. The very same place. The same dark outline of him, motionless in the falling snow. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the stone, and she watched his face find her and settle. That small, unconscious change that happened in him whenever she arrived anywhere he was. She had learned to read that change. She had learned to look for it. It was, she had come to understand, the thing she had been starving for her whole life without ever once having a name for it. The simple, steady gladness of being seen by someone who wanted nothing from her but her. Snow had begun again, soft, sideways, catching in his dark hair and on the heavy shoulders of his cloak. Below them, the cliff face lay white and silent. Somewhere down there, in the sheltered shelf of rock she could have climbed to in the dark with her eyes closed, the silver moss was sleeping under the snow. She did not need it anymore. She came to stand beside him at the edge of the world. "There is something I owe you," she said. He waited. "An answer," she said, "to a question you never quite asked." The snow fell between them. "You asked me once," she said, "in the fire room, why I chose the moss over the suppressant herbs. And I told you it was because the moss left no trace, because it made me into nothing, instead of making me into a question someone might want to open." She kept her eyes on the white valley below. "That was true, but it was not the whole truth. I have been turning the rest of it over for months now, on the cold mornings, when I cannot sleep. The moss grows here," she said, "on this cliff, in this territory, because the land is old, and it holds the signature of whoever has claimed the ground." She looked down at the snow-covered shelf far below, where the silver-green sleep waited for spring. "It only grows where an alpha has claimed the land, and of all the cliffs in all the north." She turned to look at him. "My wolf brought me to yours." He went very still. "4 years," Wren said softly. "4 years I climbed this exact cliff. There were closer territories, safer ones, ground I could have harvested without ever trespassing on a king who could have ended me with a word. But my wolf would not have them. She brought me here, again and again, before I knew what she was reaching for, before I would let myself know." A breath. "I told myself it was the practical choice," she said. "The smart choice. I do not think it was practical at all. I think she was finding her way to where she needed to be, long, long before the rest of me was brave enough to understand it." The snow settled on his shoulders, on the dark of his hair, along the old line of his jaw, and the faint scar there she had once tended by firelight. His eyes were gold. They had been gold for months now, settled into their color like a fire that had finally found the fuel it was always meant to burn, and had no intention of going out. "Wren," he said. His voice was very steady, the steadiness of a man who had been carrying something for a long, long time, and was at last about to set it down. "I am going to ask you something, and I need you to know, before I do, that whatever your answer is, nothing changes between us. Not the work, not the room, not any of it. You will be exactly as safe tomorrow as you are tonight, no matter what you say to me now." She looked at him directly. "Ask," she said. "Will you let me?" He did not elaborate. He did not need to. There was only ever one shape the question could take between an alpha with gold in his eyes and the woman his blood had quietly chosen. On your own terms, he said, in your own time, only ever when you want it, and not one moment before. And if the answer is never, then it is never. And I will still be standing on this path the morning after, glad to the bone simply to see you walk up it. And here it was, the thing she had run from since she was 12 years old. The thing she had watched break a girl in an old hall full of candle flames. The bond, the bite, the oldest weapon in the world, the one that had been used on Sable while a hall full of people called it beautiful, the one that had sent Ren up a frozen cliff in the dark for 4 long winters just to escape its reach. And he was holding it out to her on an open hand, asking, not taking, asking. She thought of the girl she had been, pressed behind a carved pillar, making a small, frightened vow to herself in the dark. She thought of everything it had cost to travel the long road from that girl to this windswept ledge. The cold mornings, the careful calculations, the years of making herself into nothing so that she might stay whole. She thought of what he had said to her, by the fire, with the storm clawing at the walls, a choice freely made, and a choice with every other road closed. Every road was open now. She could turn and walk back down the path. She could say never, and he would mean it when he said he would still be glad to see her. She could go on with the work and the room and the careful, safe distance for the rest of her life, and not one soul in the whole North could make her do otherwise. That was the entire point. That was the thing she had bled for in the cold council chamber, with her hands shaking and her voice ringing off the stone, the freedom to refuse. And it was only because she could refuse, fully and freely, and with nothing standing in her way, that her yes could mean anything at all. She lifted her hand and pressed her palm flat against his chest. The same gesture she had made in the corridor outside the council room all those months ago. And she felt, as she had felt then, the strong and unmistakable beat of his heart beneath her hand, faster than she would ever have expected from this contained and careful man, faster than his still face ever once let show. Yes, she said. His breath left him slow and warm, clouding in the cold air between them. He raised his hand to her face, careful, as always, and this time she did not wait for him to hesitate. She turned into his palm before he could second-guess a single thing, pressing her cheek into the warmth of his hand, and she let herself feel it, all of it, without pulling back, without bracing, without keeping the smallest part of herself held back in reserve for a betrayal that was never going to come. Now, he asked quietly. Now, she said. The bond settled into place, not like a lock clicking shut. She had braced, somewhere deep down, for exactly that, for the snap of a door closing, the feeling of a thing decided and final and no longer hers to hold. It was not like that at all. It was like a river finding its valley, not a new thing forced into being, but the quiet completion of something that had always, patiently, been moving toward this. Something that had been finding its way down for a very long time, around old stone and under deep snow, certain of its course, even when she had not been, until at last it reached the low green place it had always been seeking, and simply arrived. She felt him in her, suddenly, warm, steady, the shape of him resting at the edge of her own mind, where there had been only her careful silence for so many years, and her wolf, who had known all along, who had carried her to this exact cliff before Wren could let herself understand the reason, lifted her head at last, and was at peace. His forehead came to rest against hers. Below them, the valley held its great snow silence. Above them, the sky was the particular pale gray of winter mornings that hold every possibility for the day ahead. And Wren, who had spent 4 years making herself invisible, who had given up the very smell of her own skin to keep herself safe, who had climbed frozen rock in the dark 100 times rather than be seen, let herself be seen completely, and was not afraid. They stood on the cliff a long while after. The snow kept falling, soft, indifferent, settling on her hair and his. "The young one at the ceremony," she said at last, her cheek against his chest. "Linnet. She is coming back next season. She told me so herself, on her own terms." A breath. "She would have done what I did before. Found a cliff, found a moss, found some way to vanish." "I know," he said. "That is what it was all for," she said. "Not the law on its sheet of parchment, the girl who comes back." She tipped her head up to look at him. "I used to believe that safety meant becoming nothing, small enough that no one could reach me." A pause. "It never did. It was never supposed to cost me myself." Something moved through Thorn's face, that vast, quiet shifting, the mountain turning in its sleep. "No," he said, "it was not." Below them, under the deep snow, the silver moss slept on the cliff face, waiting for a girl who would never come climbing for it again. Some bonds are not written in ceremony. They are written in cliff faces and dawn harvests, and the kind of patience that has learned how to wait without ever once taking. They are written in the long, still space between a question asked and an answer freely given, in the quiet place where a heart finally discovers that it is no longer afraid. What the moon writes in breath and blood shall be made whole, but only when it is chosen.